Right, tonight we are picking up in the dispensation of government. That's where we were talking about last week, and this would be the dispensation that's of course referenced as the dispensation of government, because specific rules are given to Noah more specifically in relation to the fact that if a man kills another man, and this is in Genesis chapter 9 verse 6, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he is made. So there you would have a governmental type of a system set up to where if you murdered somebody, you would actually be put to death by men also, and that would be a just. And I'm sure this comes from, we don't get a whole lot of information, but we do know, like with the example of setting up the world system judicial, the judicial branch of the world system back over in Genesis in the last dispensation, where we have, since Cain killed a man on purpose, and he would be avenged 7 times if anybody killed him. I killed a man in defense, and therefore it should be 70 times 70. And I'm sure that went on through the rest of the dispensation, which, remember, was a few thousand years. Well, just under 2,000 years, I think, is actually what it boiled down to be as far as time. So now you have that restriction. We do have other information, but it's not really restricted quite to the same. I mean, this is more the law would be, or the rule here would be, you're to put a man to death if he kills another. There's a change in the diet. We're now allowed to eat animals, where prior we were not. So that was a change. And then, of course, God also gives a couple of instructions as far as be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. You're to spread out and you're to fill the earth again. Fill it full again.
Yeah. Was there any restrictions on eating like clean versus unclean animals?
No, there's nothing that says that. Yep.
Okay, because there was a distinction. Because when Noah brought animals into the ark, he brought more of the clean than he did of the unclean.
Yes, correct. And the only restriction is you can't eat them with the blood in them. You basically had to drain the blood out, which was the life, the source of it. So, but otherwise, no restrictions on what they could actually eat at that point. We don't get that, of course, until more specifically the law. So here, mankind, other than the blood, is allowed to eat anything he wants. As we were talking about this too, when you go through the timelines, and I know there's some what do you call them, theories out there that try to modify the timeline because it doesn't make sense to them, but after the flood there was a pretty catastrophic change to the world. I mean, we think of the flood, and a lot of times the flood is focused very heavily on, the fountains of the deep opened up, and then we had water coming down from the heavens. It didn't rain at that time, so where did the water come from?
Underground.
Well, the fountains opened up, and that would be underground, but it also rained. Where would that water have come from? Because they didn't have clouds at that time. They didn't have rain. It actually, a mist came up from the ground that watered the earth at that point in time. Remember the way that Scripture describes the recreation of or renovation. Yeah, it still had an ice covering. So that ice covering would have come down, which could also, if I can get this, my computer's trying to apply an update, so it's been really slow. So just FYI. Prior to this, of course, we had we have the earth, and then we have a dome around it of ice. This comes down. Now, the earth is spinning at this point. And there is good scientific evidence to show why we have the ice caps on the top and the bottom. Where would the water have gone? If you spin something like that, and they said they know how this works, it would have actually cycled to both ends naturally, and it would have dumped massive amounts of water, and well, it would have been quick and it would have been cold, which we have evidence of that. We have animals that are frozen still with green food in their mouth, and that's like instant freeze, you know. So that came out. So the end result is now when we have at the other side of this, the flood is over. God has He's caused the water to retreat back down into the earth. Remember, He actually brought the land out from the water the first time around. So even though, you know, today they want to talk about how if the ice caps melt, we're just going to, you know, the seas are going to rise and we're all going to die. Well, no, we're not, you know, because the water has its limit, and that's just the way God said it. And plus, maybe they've never seen a glass of water with ice in it melt.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, you can't connect the two.
Yeah, because you know, it doesn't work that way. So
ice displaces more as a solid than it does as a liquid.
yeah, exactly. It's like you know, because I was thinking the other way. I was like, you know, no, they would go down a little bit, if anything, if you want to give them any credit. But anyway, so now we have an Earth that doesn't have an ice dome. So now all of a sudden, well, we have an environment like we see today. You know, they could see some things, but they couldn't see the sun like we see it today. They could see the stars, but they didn't get the clarity that we have today. You know, now all of a sudden they have that clarity. And this is, of course, after the flood. It's very catastrophic. This is going to affect plant life, all kinds of things. You know, their favorite vegetables can't grow anymore because it's not a very good environment for them to grow in. I don't know. You know, did they need that basically greenhouse type environment in order to grow properly? You know, but anyway, man is allowed now to eat because, you know, he has to. And let's see, without the blood, of course. Man is going to be putting men to death if they violate the law, or really, it's not really a law, because we don't have a law, it's a standard. It's a governmental standard, is what it is. Because it really isn't a thou shalt not kill, and if you kill, it just says, if you kill, you will be killed. So we really don't have a law at that point. Noah and his sons are given a promise. And what is the promise that they're given? And that actually really, God would not flood the earth again. And that's really important because what they do here, it helps explain that. When we understand He won't flood the earth again. At this point, by the way, the earth is still fairly flat in one continent. You know, it talks about mountains, and we've referenced mountains before. I mean, here, you know, honestly, I could say the mountains we have here in Washington, these are little foothills. I wouldn't really call them mountains. Go over to Colorado and you can see some mountains. You know, but these are pretty big. But then, of course, you get out into the plains, and what do they call a mountain?
Anything over about 100 feet.
Yeah, exactly. If you can't quite see over it, that's a mountain. You know, it's just so it's relative. So we got to be careful with saying, oh, there were these massive, massive mountains. Well, I know that there were no huge mountains because the earth hasn't been split up at this point. So how much water rose up? 80 feet? Maybe. Would it take 80 feet to drown all the living creatures on the earth? I don't know. 100? You know, It wasn't miles of water anyway. And again, that goes into understanding stuff, because they are going to build themselves a little tower because they don't believe God. They're going to build themselves a little tower, and this little tower is going to be to protect them from when God floods the earth again. But yet God told them, He gave them the sign of a rainbow. He says, every time you see the rain coming, you're going to see this, and you're going to know that that is my promise, that I will not flood the earth. And even though we didn't go through that catastrophic flood, there's a few times I've seen that rainbow in the middle of storms, and you're like, okay, I know God's not, this isn't going to be the end of the world. But because, some of these storms can get pretty vicious.
Stop before 40 days.
Yeah, it should stop before 40 days, So we're not going to have the flooding of the earth anymore. I can't really do a black and white rainbow. That doesn't really work. But anyway, so that's the... we do still have the fact that man is to believe in God. He is to seek God. That still is in, if they wanted to, in relation to salvation, they were required to seek God.
That was shortly after the tower that he actually split the continents, right?
Yep, shortly after that point. So it's good.
Nothing is spread out then.
He will spread. Yep, he will spread them out. Which the way he did it was quite interesting, because if you change the language and you can't understand, what are you going to tend to do? You're going to tend to group in areas of people you can understand. And then he just came along and said, let's just make you spread out. And he broke up the continents and he spread them out. Granted, not quite that much, but that looks like a... anyway, we won't go there. That's an interesting drawing.
That's the geologists are on the right track when they say, like, you can sort of push them all back together and see how North America and South America fit into Africa and Asia and all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, they used to deny this, but now they're like, oh, well, yeah, okay. It does actually kind of fit back together.
Yeah.
And I do wonder with the earthquakes, before the millennial kingdom comes in, is he going to restore it to one continent? Is he going to bring everybody back? Yeah, he's going to flatten the mountains, and in doing that, is that going to bring all of the continents back into... He doesn't say that, but the way he describes how the nations come up and other stuff like that, it's like, how to, like with, from America, how do we get over there? Because there will be nations, and, a nation may be, I don't know if it'll be called America or not, to be honest with you. I know Egypt will be there. I know there's a few names that Scripture talks about. But anyway, they split that up. So this dispensation, though, even though we have 6 people here, they're being instructed by God. Now Noah's the head of the family. So he's got his sons. He's got his 3 sons. So technically there's 8. But I mean, we've got the 3 sons who are going to repopulate the earth at this point. And really they're the ones that should be believing. And Noah should be also, because Noah does live beyond the Tower of Babel. So he's still alive at that time when that happens. So they don't really take God at His word. But prior to that, we do see some things leading up to the failure also, because it's not just that they all decided to come together in one place. And then they decided to, their sin nature started to go crazy. And then they just decided to build a temple. Well, it was a temple because they were worshiping the heavens out of it. And then they wanted to make it big enough to where, I guess X amount of people could survive the next flood coming, because they knew very well God was going to bring a flood. At least they perceived it. If they had been listening to Him, They would have realized he's not bringing a flood, but they didn't listen. And we see that from Romans chapter 1, by the way. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through the rest of the chapter helps us understand what is going on here. You gotta put it in the context here when Paul's talking about this. He says, really, I mean, he starts because of the wrath of God. Because the wrath of God is revealed, and it is a quality of the wrath of God. It is not the wrath of God. It's not talking about the tribulation period. It's a quality of God's wrath from God. It's manifested from the heavens unto all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, the ones holding down the truth in righteousness, or unrighteousness, excuse me, because that which is known concerning them, or concerning God, is manifested among them, for God manifested it to them. When did God manifest the things about him to all of mankind? Time period wise, this is actually specifically talking about right after the flood. For the invisible things concerning him, from a creation of the world to the understanding things made, has been caused to be clearly perceived, both his everlasting natural ability and divinity, resulting in them being without excuse. Now that actually still does apply to us today. Can you see God? You can't physically see him, but you can sure see his handiwork. You know, and the reality of, especially, when the funny part about, it's not really funny, but the thing about evolution is it's a known lie. You know, we're not wrestling with a theory anymore. It is actually a known lie. It's not possible. DNA is one of the areas that really helps us understand that, because we have a percentage of DNA that cannot be reconciled. Period. I mean, they say, oh, we're 80% like the apes. That 20% can't be reconciled. It could not have come from that creature. And any scientist who's going to be honest about it sees it. You know, there's lots of evidence in that. They knew God. Knowing God, what did they choose to do? Even though they knew God. Now, not everybody today knows God. So again, we have to look at, when did everybody know God? It would have been right after the flood. They did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing themselves or affirming themselves to be wise, they became foolish and exchanged the proper opinion of the incorruptible God with the likeness of the image of man, and birds, four-footed animals, and crawling things. And of course we go back to, what were they actually worshiping? The stars. You know, we have the zodiac, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that still comes down today. Making God into the image of a man. Also, by the way, remember that the spirit beings who were
perverted creatures. Perverted creatures, a combination of man and beast.
Yep. Mm-hmm. They were doing all kinds of stuff. And of course, God let them. He's like, fine, if you want to go that direction, I'll just let you, and you'll pay the result for it. You know, it's interesting how God's wrath, and we see, of course, today God's wrath. Why is unrighteousness allowed to rule today? It's not being allowed to rule. He's just letting them work it out to its end. You know, and there's a few of them, like Pharaoh, where he's saying, you know, Pharaoh's a good example. He's like, no, I'm not letting you out. Pharaoh says, okay, I'll let him go. God says, no, you won't. I'm not done with you. And God can do that because Pharaoh had already refused God. And God's like, no, I'm going to finish it, and I'm going to show the entire world that your gods are nothing. You know, we don't really, at least when I was taught as younger, I never really fully understood. Egypt was completely decimated when Israel left. Israel left with all their money too. You know, I mean, totally decimated. That entire That was the nation to be in at that time.
Glad to see them go. Get up here.
Yeah, they wanted them gone, but in doing that, they were completely and totally decimated.
No army, no wealth.
Yep.
No crops.
No, yeah, hardly any animals, because most of them died. It would have been very rough at that point. God made himself known so well. When Israel crossed over the river, what were the people in the cities over there? Well, I heard what happened over there. Some of them were smart enough to obey. Others, yeah. They changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator. The creation. They rendered religious service to the creation, not the creature. This is kritis. This is not your word for creature, as our translations in the King James and NAS do. It is your creation. That's what they were worshiping. What God had created. Remember, kritis ma, you have to have a ma ending in order for it to be a creature. And a ma ending would indicate the result of a creation, henceforth, a creature. Normal Greek. But anyway, we get down here into verse 32, you see, and although, or whosoever, fully experientially knew the ordinances of God. You don't quite pick that up in our other translations. They didn't just know it, they experienced it. They had an experiential knowledge of it. That the ones practicing such things, because remember it just went through a big list of unrighteousness. The ones practicing these things are worthy of death, and not only those who practice these things, but also the ones who are proving towards the ones who practice these things. They knew that what they were doing was going to bring death. Which means they weren't guessing, it's not like they're getting off the boat going, why in the world did God do this? They knew why God did it. They knew exactly why. So back over in Genesis, I said they are rejecting God, and we see that here not very far in with Nimrod over in Genesis chapter 10 and verse 9. Now there is a translation issue here. It references it as he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And that sounds kind of nice, doesn't it? He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. The only problem is it's an adjective, and you can't do that with mighty hunter. He was a hunter of mighty ones. So it wasn't he was a mighty hunter. It's get your hunter where it belongs, and your mighty, and this would be mighty ones. You understand this word mighty, and you go into Scripture and you look at that. This is talking about those who had authority. He was hunting men that had some level of authority, and he was killing them.
He was like the uno assassin.
Yep. Yeah. He was setting up his kingdom, is what he was doing. And he was doing it through murdering these people. Now this, of course, you got to go into the Hebrew to understand this. And it's not, you're not pushing the Hebrew when you're doing this. This is the normal way you would do this. Because you have here your noun, which would be a hunter, and then your word mighty or strong in the way that it's described. It's actually a noun. It's not, when it comes to adjectives, when the attributive position, they always follow the noun and agree in case, number, and gender. Here we have a genitive construct of the nouns, so it cannot be interpreted as a mighty hunter because the word mighty is not being used adjectively, and that's, again, this, I know I'm getting really technical here, but I think in this case it's kind of important because, see if I can actually get this to copy for me. There we go. It's these right here. This is a noun, and it means mighty ones. And this right here is your word for hunter. So it's not being used adjectively. It actually doesn't agree. There's not a proper agreement, and there's not proper positioning between these two nouns. This construction, or this noun construction that they have here, is called a genitive construct, and it's a normal construct for Hebrew. So it is, like I said, you would normally translate this any other place. You would translate it a hunter of, or whatever noun you want to put there, of whatever noun in relation. And then in this case, it's hunter of mighty men. So he hunted down mighty men. And we see why he did that. Here, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. He's setting up his kingdom. Okay? It wasn't just a matter of him being the best hunter. He was hunting mighty men. And let's see, I didn't go into that as well as I would have liked to, because I was thinking about even going into that word and showing the concept here of mighty and how it is actually being used in Scripture. To better understand the fact that it is it's ones who have authority, because we have Esau. Oh, actually, I grabbed the word hunter, didn't I? Yep. Oops. Wrong one. No. That's the right word. He was a knowledgeable. Interesting. I'll have to look into that more. That is not, I don't think it actually pulled up the word I wanted. Homologen. Should be you. Yep, it did. Where are you? The lazy man does not roast his prey. His hunting. I'm getting myself slightly distracted here, because these are giant ones. I'll dig more into that, because I think I need to explain that a little bit better from Scripture, actually. I'm not explaining it very well. And I don't know, I might have done it a little bit later in my notes. Let me check to make sure, because I was going through that, and I did want to... I was explaining in my notes, I was explaining the textual part of it. I will pull some more information for that to kind of show how it's actually used in its particular form, so we can get some better usage out of it, so we can understand that. Because the way it makes it look, it's like he's one who's hunting, but it is a slightly different way that it's being expressed there. So he sets up his own kingdom. He sets it up through violence, is what he does. As we can see here, we have the beginning of Babel. And we have a few others, and we have the land of Shinar. This will bug me, because I'm not pulling the right word. Ah. Yes. The first word is Gadol. The first one is Gadol. I'm getting I forget. You got to go backwards with Hebrew. It's tired. It's late. So it's like the first one. Yeah, Gadol is the one you actually want to look at to see how that one's actually used in relation to men. And it is used one who is a great man is one who has authority. Here you have. Let's see. Here is mighty men of valor, or great men of valor. Down at the bottom, so they would have been men who had greatness or value to them. Now, in this case, it very clearly says of valor. These were the kind of guys that you did not want to meet in battle. It just. I mean, when you look at some of the stories, I'd be like, here's my sword, do whatever you want, because I'm not fighting you. Because these guys were, they were very valiant men. And you have to, because a lot of these relate to, in this case, it does relate to mighty. But here over in Joshua, that he feared greatly because Gideon was a great city, like the one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than I, and all its men were mighty. And it's, then of course the word there is questionable. And it's ish, it's highborn mighty ones. It's highborn men were mighty. They actually had a high position, or strong in that sense, is the way that it's expressing it here. So it's not saying they were mighty. It's saying, it uses the word ish, which means a highborn one. And their highborn ones were mighty. They had a lot of authority. They were strong in that sense. Remember, strength is not always physical strength. Strength can be in authority also. Here we have the survivors down at the people of the Lord came down over the mighty ones. They translated warriors here in the NAS, but it is just your mighty ones. The Lord made me have dominion over the mighty, the ones who have strength, the ones who are great in that sense, and looking in the context there. So this word great or mighty does actually have the idea of a person who has authority or is great in that sense. And of course we get that here, properly understanding he is a hunter of mighty men. The beginning of the kingdom was Babel and Erech and Asad and Calnan, and in the land of Shinar is where they're at. And at this point, out of that land went forth Asher and built Nineveh, and of course it's going to talk about, you know, why did they go out from that land? Well, here it doesn't specifically give it. We get that a little bit later, because now it's saying, you know, we have the setting up of the kingdoms, and out from him came this kingdom, and then we have the scattering. But they weren't scattered at this point. They're scattered in the next chapter tells you what's going on. In chapter 11, the whole earth was of one language at this point. One language, and had the same, here it's one another, the same words or matters. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Now, of course, again, remember the last one was talking about how they were splitting about. Now we're talking about prior to that splitting about. They're in the land of Shinar. They settled there. And they said to us, to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used bricks and stones, and they used tar for mortar. Now, if you've been in construction, you're looking at about 8 stories of stable. You're not going higher than that. You're not making this massive tower like we have today.
They had no rebar.
No. Yeah, they don't have steel. They're not using steel here.
Mud.
They're using mud. They're using tar. Other stuff like that. And why are they doing it? This would be, now you can see the will reach into heaven is in italics. They're not interested in it. It's your word that would typically, the way that it's described here, it's let's come, let's make a city, let's build a city, which is head, the temple, its head is, it uses an in, or a preposition here that would really have more of an idea of with reference to. It uses a baith, but how is it, is it going to be in the heavens? No. Is it going to be among the heavens? That's not really the way it's being expressed. No, go away. It won't do it when I want it to do it, but it will sure do it right in the middle of what I'm doing. So, thank you, Microsoft. So, and I got that on tape. So, anyway, we can edit that. Let's see, we're at the tower. They're going to make themselves, yeah, I was looking at the base, and you go and you dig into it a little bit more. There's a lot on the preposition for in, by, among, understanding how it relates. And one of the references is with reference to, is the way that it's being used. Accompanying, you have the with idea and precedence. I mean, this is a big word. There's a lot of different uses in the way. You know, here we have by the reckoning, with measured or a standard. This can also be used in that way. Slightly different. It's used in certain classes with different verbs, and it can mean, you know, in the way that they're actually used here. It's used with verbs of ruling and governing and restraining, taking refuge, trusting, relying. I say it's a big word, and in here it's not. They're not making a tower whose head is going to be in the heavens. And even if it was in the heaven, and it's plural here. So are they talking about the first heaven or the second heaven? They're talking at least about two heavens, not about one. It's not talking about going up into the third heaven, and it's not. There's no article there, so it's not the heaven. And they translate it singular, but it's actually plural. It's with reference to the heavens, or in other words, they were worshiping the heavens. They were worshiping the stars. Now I have no doubt Noah and his kids, you know, they probably spent many nights staring up at those stars going, wow, that's just absolutely stunning. Because they grew up where they didn't have stars. And now they begin to, well, they're seeing all kinds of weird creatures. I still can't quite make out all the little symbols they use in the stars. I'm like, that's supposed to be a what? I mean, connect the dots doesn't quite work very well with that, but, you know, maybe they could see them better than I can. I don't know. They didn't have city lights and stuff to blur the... I have no idea. But anyway, it's with reference to it. So that they won't be scattered across the face of the earth. Why would they be scattered across the face of the earth? God told them they're going to be scattered. He told them to move across. So, or to spread out. And the Lord comes down and he sees what men are building at this point, and the Lord says, behold, the people are one in all the same language, and this is what they have begun to do, and nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. And this is not a good statement. This is saying, well, especially when you really understand you're only talking about 100 years from the flood. It didn't take man very long to just go really the wrong way. A whole lot faster than it took him before. You know, because we're talking almost 2,000 years before where he was really, really corrupt. Now 100 years. And when you get from Romans chapter 1, that corruption, obviously the sons brought a lot of that baggage with them as they were coming over, which we see sadly some of that right from the very beginning, and one of the sons is cursed as a result of it. You know, and that's not a very pleasant thing to talk about. But anyway, so we have the dividing of the languages at this point. God comes down and he divides their language up into another one. Language is one of the most interesting things when you really understand it, because this concept here, when he divided it, it wasn't just about speaking another language. They understand in a different way, which is really interesting. You know, speaking in another language, you interpret things in a different way. You still get to the same truth. I mean, it's not to say that one is better than the other. It's just a different way of coming about it. And it's still proper. You get that from understanding cultures and stuff, and the differences there. But so he changed. He didn't just confound. So it wouldn't just confuse the language, because at first, like today, why didn't they just hang together for a while? Their kids would have picked it up in no time. It actually changed the demeanor, the way they do things. Is going to take a while to understand. It was very confusing, and that divided them up. And then God made sure they didn't come back together for a while. He split up the earth, and we see that with Peleg. And we have to go into the genealogy, the big, long, boring genealogy, where suddenly you realize there's something in there that says Peleg, and he was named Peleg because at that time the earth was being divided. You give your kid a name according to what's going on. So very interesting. But let's go ahead and close there.